There is a silent weight carried by countless men, the daily march into the 9-to-5 routine, where their value seems to be measured only by how much they produce. Day after day, they trade their hours for paychecks, their energy for deadlines, their identity for a title. To many, this is simply life, the unavoidable cost of survival, the path of responsibility. And yet beneath the surface, an unsettling question lingers. Is a man only valuable when he works? Society says yes, and most men accept this without question, fearing that without their labor they would be nothing. But this interpretation is false. The deeper truth is that when worth is tied only to productivity, life shrinks into a prison where even success feels hollow. Alan Watts warned of this emptiness, the tragedy of mistaking constant activity for living, of believing that if you are not working, you are not worthy. What seems like responsibility can become servitude, and what looks like purpose can mask a deep forgetting of who you are beyond your role. To feel trapped by work is not a sign of weakness. It is the first glimpse of awakening to the illusion. Before we dive deeper, I invite you to pause and support this reflection. Subscribe, share this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. By doing so, you are not just helping this channel. You are extending a hand to other men who carry the same burden, men who may be waiting for a reminder that they matter beyond their productivity. Because perhaps the real prison is not the 9-to-5 itself, but the belief that outside of it, there is nothing. And as we move forward, we will uncover why the very emptiness men fear may be the doorway to freedom. Before awakening, the man in the 9-to-5 lives under an invisible contract. His worth is tied to what he does, not who he is. Every morning, he puts on the mask of usefulness, convinced that the world only respects him if he produces, if he grinds, if he keeps the machine turning. His identity shrinks into the shape of his job title, his paycheck, his performance reviews. When someone asks, "Who are you?" he answers with what he does, not with what he feels or dreams. And at first, this seems normal, even noble. He tells himself that he is responsible, that his sacrifice proves his strength, that one day all this labor will buy him freedom. But the truth is that the longer he lives this way, the more the horizon of freedom retreats. Each promotion brings new chains, each raise brings new expenses, and the cycle never ends. After awakening, he begins to see the cracks in this illusion. He notices how much of his energy goes into maintaining a system that never truly nourishes him. He questions whether his value really disappears when he stops producing, and for the first time, he dares to imagine that he is more than his output. This shift is terrifying, because it dismantles the only foundation he has ever known. Yet it is also liberating, because it reveals that the bars of the prison were never solid. They were made of belief. When he stops identifying with the role, he realizes he has always been more than the worker, more than the provider, more than the cog in the machine. Others will not always understand. To his colleagues, he may seem unmotivated or strange, no longer chasing promotions with the same hunger. To his family, he may appear reckless, questioning the very structure that promises security. They may whisper that he is lazy, ungrateful, even irresponsible. But within, he knows that this is not laziness. It is clarity. He has begun to see that a life spent only in service to work is not truly lived. What looks like drifting away is actually drawing nearer to himself. And though the world may resist this shift, it cannot take from him the seed of freedom that has already begun to grow. The prison of the 9-to-5 is not built from walls of steel, but from expectations that begin long before a man enters the workforce. From childhood, he is told that his future depends on how hard he studies, how disciplined he becomes, how willing he is to sacrifice for the sake of stability. By the time he is grown, the idea has been etched into his very bones. If you are not working, you are wasting your life. And so he steps into the cycle without question, believing that exhaustion is proof of worth, that long hours are badges of honor, and that one day, after decades of grinding, he will finally rest. But what he does not notice is that life does not wait for him. The years slip away while he is busy earning them, and when he pauses, he finds that the freedom he hoped for has always been delayed until tomorrow. Before awakening, he lives under the illusion that his value lies in productivity, and so he becomes addicted to the very routine that suffocates him. He fills every silence with tasks, every weekend with chores, every free moment with distractions that resemble work, checking emails, planning, calculating, measuring. He does not know how to simply sit, to simply breathe, because in stillness the illusion unravels and the fear returns. If I am not useful, then who am I? It is this fear that keeps him chained, not the job itself, but the belief that without it, he is nothing. After awakening, however, something unexpected happens. Perhaps it begins with burnout, or a sudden loss, or simply the quiet realization that no amount of labor will ever satisfy the hunger for recognition. In that moment, he sees that his life has been traded piece by piece for a promise that was never kept. And yet, instead of despair, this realization carries within it the seed of freedom. For once he recognizes that his worth is not dependent on productivity. The prison begins to crumble. He discovers that he is valuable not because of what he produces, but because he exists. This simple truth, so easy to dismiss, becomes the foundation of a new way of living. To those around him, this shift is confusing, even threatening. Co-workers see him stepping back, refusing to sacrifice his health for deadlines, and they whisper that he has lost ambition. Friends who are still trapped in the cycle feel betrayed, as if his refusal to play the game exposes the hollowness of their own choices. Even family may resist, clinging to the old belief that survival depends on constant striving. But what they cannot see is that his distance is not failure, it is honesty. He is no longer willing to pretend that a man's worth is measured in hours, worked or money earned. And while others may see arrogance, what truly guides him now is humility. The humility to accept that life is not something to be purchased later, but something to be lived now. When a man begins to step back from the grind, the reactions of others often cut sharper than the grind itself. Colleagues whisper that he is unmotivated, that he has lost his edge, that he is no longer one of them. Friends, still caught in the cycle, may distance themselves, as if his refusal to run in the same race exposes the futility of their own efforts. Even those closest to him, family, partners, mentors, may feel unsettled, urging him to stay in line, to keep producing, to remain useful, for fear that without the job he will fall into ruin. From the outside, his change appears reckless, arrogant, or even dangerous. And so the man who dares to question the prison often finds himself misunderstood, isolated, or judged. But within, something entirely different is happening. The same silence that once terrified him begins to teach him. Where before he avoided stillness because it made him feel useless, now he discovers that stillness is not emptiness, but presence. He begins to see that his value is not tied to what he provides others, but to his ability to be fully alive in this moment. The tension between appearance and essence grows sharper. Outwardly, he may look like a man drifting away from responsibility. Inwardly, he is discovering a kind of integrity that cannot be shaken by titles, paychecks, or performance reviews. His life no longer bends to the illusion that busyness equals worth. Instead, he lives more slowly, but with a depth that others cannot yet comprehend. This is where solitude becomes both his burden and his strength. To walk away from the illusion is to endure misunderstanding, and yet it is in this very distance that he finds freedom. He is no longer enslaved by the need to prove himself every hour of every day. He can work, yes, but work no longer defines him. He can rest, and rest no longer fills him with guilt. He can exist without the constant applause of productivity, and this existence itself becomes proof of value. What once seemed like weakness, the refusal to run endlessly, emerges as power. What looked like loss, the fading of old ambitions, becomes liberation, and what appeared as isolation reveals itself as clarity. The more he embraces this truth, the more familiar ideas take on new meaning. Failure, once his greatest fear, no longer carries the same weight. Before, every setback at work was like a scar on his worth, proof that he was falling behind, that he was not enough. He would lie awake replaying mistakes, convinced that a single misstep erased years of effort. But after awakening, failure becomes something different. It is no longer the collapse of his value, but the collapse of an illusion that his identity was tied to performance. Failure now becomes a teacher, stripping away the lies that kept him chained, reminding him that he is not his productivity, not his title, not his output. Silence, too, is transformed. Before, it haunted him. He filled his evenings with distractions, his weekends with noise, because the thought of being still left him restless, afraid that stillness proved he was wasting time. But now, silence becomes his companion. In quiet moments, he begins to feel the richness of simply existing, without needing to justify it to anyone. The absence of tasks no longer feels like emptiness, but like fullness, like a chance to remember himself beyond the machine of work. In this silence, he touches a power he never knew, because power, he discovers, is not the ability to produce endlessly, but the ability to live without fear of being nothing. Even the very idea of masculinity, once tied so closely to labor and provision, begins to shift. Before, he believed that to be a man was to sacrifice endlessly, to exhaust himself, to carry burdens without complaint. But after, he realizes that true strength is not self-erasure, but self-acceptance. It is not the endless grind, but the courage to step away when the grind consumes his soul. This reinterpretation unsettles those around him. They may say he has grown soft, that he has abandoned ambition, that he is not living up to the standard of manhood defined by labor. But in truth, he has reclaimed his humanity, refusing to reduce his life to a single role. What looks like weakness is in fact the deepest strength, the strength to live as himself, not as a machine. As this transformation deepens, the man begins to notice how the shift within him quietly alters every part of his life. Before, his days were consumed by an invisible hunger for approval, a gnawing sense that unless he was working, earning, or advancing, he was falling behind. He would drag his body through long commutes and endless meetings, telling himself that this was necessary, that one day he would look back and see it was all worth it. But in truth, the more he gave to the system, the less of himself remained. His relationships grew shallow because he was too tired to truly listen. His passions withered because they could not survive in the scraps of leftover time. Even his sense of self began to fade, until all that remained was the image of the worker, a mask that hid the emptiness beneath. After awakening, the picture begins to change in subtle yet profound ways. He no longer measures his days by productivity alone, but by presence, by how deeply he lived each moment, not how much he accomplished. This does not mean he abandons responsibility. Rather, he reclaims the right to exist beyond it. Work may still be part of his life, but it no longer owns his life. He allows himself to rest without shame, to pursue joys that serve no purpose but delight, to sit in silence without rushing to fill it. And as he does, his relationships begin to shift too. Instead of offering others the leftovers of his energy, he brings a grounded presence that cannot be faked. He is no longer distracted, no longer absent behind tired eyes. He is there, fully, and that presence is worth more than any paycheck. Of course, this shift is not without cost. To those still bound by the dream, he appears strange, even irresponsible. They whisper that he has lost ambition, that he has surrendered his drive, that he risks becoming irrelevant. Employers may see him as less valuable, friends may grow distant, even family may worry, but he carries these judgments with a calmness he never knew before, because he has seen through the illusion that fueled them. He knows now that a man's value is not determined by how endlessly he sacrifices himself for the system. His value lies in the fact that he is alive, breathing, experiencing, capable of truth, and no job, no title, no amount of work can add or subtract from that. This realization escalates into something larger, a new way of inhabiting the world. What once enslaved him, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as lazy, fear of being nothing, loses its grip. On the outside, it may look like he is stepping away, becoming quieter, harder to categorize. But inside, he is becoming freer, stronger, more whole. The man who once believed he was only valuable when he worked now knows that his true power lies in simply being. And though this journey may leave him standing apart, misunderstood by those still trapped in the cycle, he carries within him a strength that cannot be taken away, the strength of a man who no longer needs to prove his existence through endless labor. What once looked like weakness now reveals itself as strength. The man who questioned the prison of the 9 to 5 was not lazy, nor irresponsible, nor broken. He was simply awake. He discovered that his worth did not vanish when the work ended, that his existence did not need justification through productivity, and that the emptiness he once feared outside the grind was not emptiness at all, but freedom. The paradox is clear. What seemed like isolation is clarity. What seemed like loss is liberation. And what seemed like weakness is the courage to step out of illusions. He is not rejected by life. He is reclaimed by it. This awakening does not erase struggle, nor does it mean abandoning responsibility, but it transforms the meaning of those struggles, showing that work can be part of life without becoming the measure of life itself. A man who understands this walks differently. His steps are steadier, his presence deeper, his soul less burdened. The world may still call him strange, may still judge his refusal to exhaust himself for approval, but inside he knows the truth. He is no longer a cog in the machine. He is a man alive, whole, and at peace with the cost of truth. If these words have stirred something in you, let them not remain unspoken. Subscribe to this channel so you can continue receiving reflections that cut through illusion. Share this message with someone who may be quietly suffocating in the cycle of endless work. And add your thoughts in the comments below, because each story shared strengthens this space, reminding other men that they are not alone in their struggle. Together, we create not another prison, but a community where presence, truth, and freedom can finally breathe.